Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Al Balad News. Tonight, we are focusing on the fighting and atrocities taking place in Fasher as we speak in Darfur, a city that remains a key battleground in Sudan's ongoing conflict. Joining me to discuss this and more is Nathaniel Raymond, Executive Director at the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale School of Public Health. Mr. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. First of all, Mr. Raymond, how can we describe the situation in Fasher right now, especially the humanitarian circumstances, considering all the heavy fightings and bombardment taking place now between RSF and the Sudanese army?
The city has been under siege for 4 months, and during that time, we've seen significant outbreaks of fighting, but none of the previous outbreaks of fighting compare to the past 10 days. On Friday the 13th, the city was hit by at least 118 different strikes from both Sudan Armed Forces, Sukhoi ground strike jets, and also RSF artillery that left over 48 discernible craters just in one section of the city. Since that point, the joint forces and the rapid support forces have been fighting in the middle of the city near the Grand Mosque and the Souk around the second of 3 defensive lines that Sudan Armed Forces has built out of earth that has divided the city in half between RSF and SAF areas. Right now, RSF is approaching from at least 3 directions that we know of.
Yes. Mr. Raymond, you refer to the joint forces. What impact the joint forces made to the battleground in Fasher?
Well, the joint forces have claimed at least twice in recent days, in the past 72 hours or more, to have repelled at least 2 waves of rapid support forces attacks. And we do believe that joint forces have actually held back those waves in both cases. That said, we see activity in the city, particularly on the southern and due south and on the south western side of the city, which suggests that Sudan Armed Forces are reinforcing in case the joint force positions fall. And so really joint force has definitely succeeded as a blocking force. They've been able to maneuver quickly, but everyone has to understand that rapid support forces most likely outnumber Sudan Armed Forces and joint forces almost 3 to 1, and they have constant lines of resupply. Meanwhile, Sudan Armed Forces and joint forces have a lack of food, personnel, ammunition, and weapons.
Yes, and Fasher has been a key city in the conflict so far. People before anticipated that it will fall to RSF grasp in a matter of weeks or probably days, yet it is still holding on. Can you shed some light on why this city is considered so critical for both sides, and how will Fasher manage to resist so far?
Well, I'll answer the last part first. I think 2 of the big reasons that Fasher has not fallen earlier. The main fighting started in May after RSF started burning Zagawa villages, at least almost 4 dozen Zagawa villages around Fasher within a 100-kilometer radius in March, but it wasn't until May that the forces attacked. And so that meant they only had approximately 4 to 6 weeks until the rain started. And so one of the big reasons this has taken so long is weather. But the second is that initially there was pressure before UN Security Council Resolution 2736. There was initial pressure on the United Arab Emirates in that April period where RSF was in position to attack faster. And we know through credible sources that there was pressure on the RSF from UAE not to attack in that initial period. And that really bought time for people to flee in many cases. I think we have to also give credit to the fact that there's a massive defensive fortification that Joint Forces and Sudan Armed Forces has built since last year. We started to see that fortification built almost a year ago. And so in many ways, we have to also give credit to the fact that Sudan Armed Forces and Joint Forces have prepared a long time for this siege.
Yes, so Mr. Raymond, regarding your previous point that RSF outnumbers the joint forces plus the Sudanese army, and of course the rainy season has been a factor right now that occurring on the battlefield. What after the rainy season? Can we anticipate that Fasher will fall?
At the end of the day, making predictions in a yes, no, or on this day, X or Y is going to happen doesn't help. But I think it does help to talk about where the trends are going. Right now, Sudan Armed Forces controls a corridor on the western side of the city that's maybe 8 to 9 kilometers long by 4 kilometers wide, depending on how you measure it. And yes, RSF has all the advantages at this point. Now, things can change, but if none of the current trends change, what we really have to worry about is not only the fall of 6th Infantry Division in Fasher, but is a rapid support forces move on Zamzam camp. What for me is the nightmare scenario, and you can tell by watching from space that Sudan Armed Forces is also concerned about this, is that RSF takes the B-26 road going south, knocks out Sudan Armed Forces checkpoints on that road, and then from Fasher and Nyala squeezes Zamzam and surrounds it. And you can tell based on what we can see inside Zamzam that people there are also concerned about being surrounded. And that's the nightmare scenario. At this point, unless something major happens, the trend line is that Fasher will fall and Zamzam will likely be surrounded in days or weeks.
Okay. And the RSF has been accused of committing war crimes against local populations in Darfur, including Fasher, of course. After careful monitoring and observation by HRL, what specific actions RSF are taking against civilians, and what is the scale of these atrocities?
And so I'll start with what we're seeing from Sudan Armed Forces is indiscriminate bombardment that has hit civilians. So Sudan Armed Forces is not without culpability here. But on the Rapid Support Forces side, there's 3 things that they've done since the start of the siege of Fasher. One is forced displacement and arson against Sagawa communities, both outside Fasher and within Fasher. The second thing is that they have displaced hundreds of thousands of people, at least from their homes inside Fasher, and they have prevented them from accessing humanitarian aid. We have an integrated phase classification 5 in Zamzam and Fasher, which means we are over 30% severe acute malnutrition amongst children. And so they are starving, they are dying, preventable. The third thing is that they've been hitting hospitals. Rapid Support Forces have been hitting hospitals and other humanitarian infrastructure, and also bombarding places like cemeteries. So people haven't been able to get medical assistance, and they also haven't been able to move freely out of the city. And on top of that, in some cases, they haven't been able to safely even bury their dead. And so both sides have committed war crimes, but Rapid Support Forces actions are consistent with crimes against humanity. And the only reason we haven't seen El Janena or Armada style massacre violence yet is that RSF hasn't had the chance to be in close proximity to a concentrated amount of civilians the way they did in El Janena. That could happen with Zamzam.
Okay, now regarding to the popular resistance, which is much popular in the east and the north of Sudan. Given the resilience of Fasher so far, what role is local resistance, both armed and civilian, playing in defending the city against RSF advances?
Well, let's talk about the role that the ERRs The emergency rooms are playing, emergency relief rooms and resistance committees are playing in feeding and providing basic humanitarian assistance in the absence of the United Nations, in the absence of big international NGOs. It's Sudanese helping Sudanese. And for me, one of the most frustrating parts, to be honest, about this response is that I don't think there has been enough attention and really enough assistance from the international community targeted specifically at the ERRs and the RCs. Those frontline Sudanese responders are the only lifeline, and they're the best line of assistance. It's Sudanese groups. Frankly, if I was handing out the Nobel Peace Prize this year, it should go to the ERRs. And but in terms of the popular resistance, I mean, a variety of armed actors have been involved in this conflict on both sides, and sometimes it's hard to keep track. But it's clear that the joint forces in SAF-aligned militia groups have really been the front line of the fight against RSF. That is even visible from space.
Mm-hmm. There are multiple reports, Mr. Raymond, indicate that the paramilitary group has been involved in systematic targeting, of course, for the civilians, especially non-Arabs, and looting entire neighborhoods, raping and sexual trafficking, and so on. What should be the international response to this level of actions?
No party to this conflict is innocent of potential war crimes and in some cases crimes against humanity, but we cannot engage in moral equivalency between what the rapid support forces have done, in particular, which is a continuation of the 2003 genocidal violence, which when that happened, peacekeepers were deployed. We can debate the effectiveness of UNIMID and other forces, and we should, but there was ICC indictments. There was multilateral complex sanctions against leadership in the Bashir government and Khrushchev and others, and John Jaweed and Haroun. We need the same type of multilateral full court press now. There has been a over-focus on bringing RSF to the table on negotiations, and every time RSF comes to the table, they commit an atrocity while they're negotiating. In the case of Jeddah 1, we had Jenaina. In the case of Jeddah 2, we had Nyala, and later Armada. And in the case of the current Alps process, Fasher is ongoing. And so they use these negotiations as cover for action. RSF needs to be treated like criminals. They are. Now, SAF is not without fault. Absolutely, they've been committing alleged war crimes. But we can't engage in moral equivalency about ethnic targeted killing by RSF.
Mm-hmm. Many have labeled these actions in the Darfur region in general as ethnic cleansing or demographic change. Based on your analysis, how would you categorize their strategy? And what is their ultimate objective here, especially in attacking al-Fasher?
One sentence: the rapid support forces want to consolidate control over the entirety of Darfur. The most chilling moment for me was at the start of the war as part of the U.S. State Department's Conflict Observatory Program, which we were engaged in at that time, where when Jenaina was being attacked, people ran from Jenaina to Serba. And we could see basically RSF forces looking at fire sensors from NASA, looking at the thermal anomalies. We could see RSF not attacking any location that had SAF in it, okay? And so everyone was talking about the civil war between SAF and RSF, but they were burning the villages that were left from the 2003-2005 genocide period. They were sending their forces out around Jenaina to burn what was left. And so ethnic cleansing doesn't have legal meaning, and genocide requires a specific finding of special intent. And I'm not a lawyer, but what I can tell you is that they were hunting the Masalite communities They've hunted the Zagawa communities that have no military necessity, no staff forces, and they have hunted the fort. And they have done so in each place that was left standing after the last round of targeted ethnic violence that the ICC and the international community, including the United States, called genocide. So they are finishing the job they started at the beginning of the 21st century to liquidate Black Africans from Darfur and consolidate control. Now, Fasher is the last regional capital state.
And regarding to the Sudanese government request for the international community to label the RSF and their allies of militias in Darfur as terrorist groups or terrorist organizations, what are the barriers to this designation, and how might such a step impact the situation on the ground? Can even the Sudanese government make such a request?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that we have to call things by their right name. And the Rapid Support Forces behavior is consistent with alleged criminality of the highest order in violation of the Rome Statute. Meanwhile, Sudan Armed Forces is also engaged in abuses that we need to call by the right name in terms of Geneva violations in multiple cases. But the point is here is that it's time for the international community through the Security Council, yes, to call things by the right names, but to take the right action that's required. And at this point, we have to stop the fighting in Fasher. We have to stop the fighting around Sudan. But if we don't have a plan and a full court press on RSF and their sponsors to stop them in days, at most weeks, we're looking at a population at least 50% the size of Gaza, conservatively, in Zamzam. And there is no one to protect those people if Fasher falls.
Okay, Mr. Nathaniel Raymond, Executive Director at the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale School of Public Health, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this important issue. Thank you all for watching Al Balad News. Stay safe. Goodbye.